Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. My name is Yvette Martinez. I'm the Senior Director for Alumni Volunteer Engagement at the Rutgers University Alumni Association. A few quick housekeeping items. Please note that all attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of the presentations. We do encourage questions to be shared via the chat. And at the end of each presentation, we will address as many of them as we can in the time that we have. Today, we gather to share our experiences, tips, challenges, ideas, and best practices for in-person events, virtual events, and what the future of alumni programs may look like. Given how the world was turned upside down in recent years, many experienced hardships and needed connection more than ever before. And you and other Rutgers alumni leaders rose to the challenge, as did our advancement event staff in a big way. We have been impressed and grateful to see all that we did to pivot and adapt. Before we tackle that events topic with our panelists, we're honored to have two top Rutgers volunteer leaders with us today from the Rutgers University Foundation Board of Trustees, Linda Rivers and Alan Crosta. Linda is a Douglas and Business School alumna. Alan is Rutgers College and New Jersey Medical School graduate, a loyal son, and a Henry Rutgers Scholar. They are both proud parents of Rutgers graduates, and they are here today to share with us their commitment to support student success through Scarlet Promise grants, which offer essential financial support for students in need as they pursue their dream of a college education. I introduce to you Linda Rivers and Alan Crosta.
Nice to see you.
Thank you, Yvette, for that very kind introduction. My name is Alan Crosta. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I just want to thank all of you for your leadership and the time that you put into making Rutgers great. It's greatly appreciated. I'm going to give you just a short historical perspective of Scarlet Promise grants, and then Linda Rivers, the chair of our Trustee Committee on Philanthropy, will then give a little bit more detail about where we are currently. It became evident to the Board of Trustees that the financial needs of Rutgers students were having a significant impact on their academic lives. Therefore, in June of 2017, the Board of Trustees charged the board's task force on student aid to develop a set of recommendations to address the needs of Rutgers students. The task force developed a series of recommendations that resulted in the Board of Trustees supporting fundraising for Rutgers Assistant Grants, which are now renamed as Scarlet Promise Grants, and directed spending from endowed accounts controlled by the Board of Trustees to student needs that include Scarlet Promise grants. A task force on philanthropy was created in September of 2018 to build upon the philanthropic objectives of the Board of Trustees. In June of 2019, the task force on philanthropy recommended and the Board of Trustees approved a fundraising effort that would raise $3 million within 10 years for a specific endowment to support need-based student financial aid through Scarlet Promise grants. Upon President Holloway's arrival in July of 2020, he immediately commenced a $10 million fundraising effort around Scarlet Promise grants, which accelerated the board's 10-year plan. The Board of Trustees created a committee on philanthropy to further the initiative. Earlier this year, President Holloway announced that his original $10 million goal for Scarlet Promise grants was met. Now, with President Holloway's announcement on November 5th of this year of a new $50 million fundraising goal over 3 years in support of Scarlet Promise grants, Scarlet Promise grants are at the forefront of university priorities. This challenge represents our commitment to the education of our students. Linda Rivers, the chair of our philanthropy committee, will now give a little bit more detail about Scarlet Promise grants.
Thank you, Alan. And just as a quick aside, the information that you're seeing currently is our 2021 campaign literature. 2022 campaign literature is currently being worked on, and that will come out in the beginning of next year, but just so you know, this is 2021, and I will give you updated figures. So Scarlet Promise grants are part of the financial aid package as determined by the Office of Financial Aid. They are given university-wide to undergraduates to help close the gap when family, federal, and state funding are not sufficient to obtain a Rutgers education. The grants are used for tuition and other college expenses such as books, meals, and housing. Scarlet Promise grants range from $500 to $5,000 per academic year. More than 70% of Rutgers undergraduates receive some form of financial aid. To help close the financial aid gap in the academic year 2020, more than 11,000 students received Scarlet Promise grants totaling more than $33 million. And in 2021, the COVID pandemic academic year, more than 11,500 students received Scarlet Promise grants totaling $30 million. Then you would say, well, why are Scarlet Promise grants so important? For many students, a few hundred to a few $1,000s stand between success and not completing college. Stretching out one's education because the student needs to work full time to support their efforts can cause additional stress and increase the dropout rate. And the odds are against the student completing their education if they do drop out. But graduating, getting a job, and starting a career can positively affect the trajectory of that student and their families. So the Board of Trustees is reaching out to form partnerships. We like to say friends of the Board of Trustees, to raise awareness about the Scarlet Promise grants. As we approach Rutgers Giving Day, which will be Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022, our focus is the endowed portion of the Scarlet Promise grants, where donations are invested and the return on that investment is allocated for student aid in perpetuity, so forever and ever. In February and March, we would like to share the 2022 Scarlet Promise Grants campaign information and the donation link with you. And we're asking that you, in turn, share this information with family, friends, colleagues, really anyone who is supportive of our students and care about their education. Our Board of Trustee donation link will be live for only the 24 hours during Rutgers Giving Day. But of course, donations to the Scarlet Promise grants can be accepted at any time during the year. So thank you. If there are any questions or comments, Alan and I are very happy to do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Linda and Alan. I don't see any questions coming in right now, but I will make sure that if we get any that we can't answer, that we connect them with you. Also, as you shared, we can share out this document with the group after the event as well. So thank you, Linda and Alan, for your volunteer leadership, as well as your commitment to students through Scarlet Promise grants. Some of our alumni groups also have scholarships through the foundation that supports students, and it's important for us to know about this amazing vehicle that we have to address financial needs of our most economically at-risk students. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Go ahead, Linda.
And happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us the time to spend with you this afternoon. And again, any questions that you have, please forward on to Yvette. She can get them to Linda and I, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Now I introduce to you Asato and Ashley. Asato Chitu is a Newark Law graduate and the president of the Rutgers Alumni Women's Professional Network. When she's not volunteering her time to build opportunities to connect Rutgers women in the Northern New Jersey region, she's the founder and principal consultant of a healthcare compliance consulting firm. Her and fellow Women's Professional Network volunteer leaders had both in-person and virtual event experiences in the recent 2 years that helped them maintain engagement for the more than 50,000 contactable alumni in Northern New Jersey. And now they're considering new ideas about the balance of program planning as they look forward. Ashley Kotopetis is a School of Communication and Information graduate. She's also our Associate Director of Advancement Events, who has enjoyed being an event planning industry expert for the bulk of her career. Her team regularly engages thousands of our Rutgers community, both virtually and in person. And like our volunteers, was challenged to shift how events were executed over the past few years, and is excited for the variety, balance, and opportunity to connect with many more folks than ever before, which is what our data is telling us. We had more participants and more new participants than ever before in the past 2 years. So to get right to the conversation with Ashley and Asado, let's talk a little bit about planning. The planning element is when the programming ideas are originally formed. So to Asado and Ashley, I ask you, can you tell us a little bit about your program planning strategy and how you've been able to maximize resources and alumni participation through collaborative opportunities and otherwise?
Sure, I'll go first. Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending this evening. So our strategy is kind of has multiple layers. One of the first things we started when we created our newly formed advancement events team. So we merged our alumni events team and our donor events team. So now our office is centralized and handles both. We started developing these liaison roles where we really work with our partners within the foundation and within the university, whether it's partners in different chancellor-led units like New Brunswick, Newark, Camden, and RBHS, or it's our foundation colleagues like events team and workplace engagement and corporate engagement center and other areas throughout the university. We really work with them, and we have a seat at the table in their planning meetings, so we can really talk about their overall plan and their overall strategy when it comes down to the university priorities. And having these planning meetings has really put the focus on the planning of these events. And really when COVID hit, it was almost a blessing in disguise because we were able to hit pause on a lot of what we were doing and shift and refocus. And just because we had done an event for years in the past didn't necessarily mean we needed to do it, or at least do it in the same way in the future. So we really started to ask what the goal of the event is, and first even determine, should it be an event? Should we continue the event? And then if so, what format? Because now we have all of these tools. We can have the event be all virtual on Zoom. We can have it be the traditional in person, or we can do a hybrid and have a smaller audience where we live stream. So we have which I'm happy to have a vet share out afterwards, but we have a format guide where we kind of look at the benefits and the considerations for if it is going to be an event, what type of event it should be. And again, without COVID and being able to hit that pause and being able to refocus, I'm not sure we would have. So it's, again, like I said, a blessing in disguise almost.
For us as an organization, when planning events during this very uncertain time, I know it was critical for us to think about the heaviness of the time. And when I say heaviness, when we think through 2020 and through 2021, when there was an immediate pivot to everything being virtual, coupled with what was happening socially from COVID, from issues regarding, police reform, race relations. I knew personally, these were not conversations that I wanted to continue to have via Zoom, right? There was a necessity for lightness and joy. There was a need for sort of stepping away from the topics of the day, just because there was a point it just became a bit too much. And so we took that into great consideration as we planned our events, right? So when we met as our e-board meeting as a team, we knew we were not going to talk about race. We're like, well, America's racist. Don't need to talk about that. We're not going to talk about COVID because, hey, we know we all are in quarantine. So what are some new innovative things we can start to think about that our constituents would like to hear about? And so by forcing ourselves to sort of think outside of that box of what was almost easy to default to, we really were able to touch some of the folks that may have not necessarily prior joined some of our proposed virtual events, because they too were feeling that level of heaviness. So, I'll give an example. We had air fryer happy hour, right? Where I'm sure many of you probably have colleagues or friends or family members that jumped on the bandwagon and bought air fryers during COVID, right? But that event really was, did you pick up a new thing during quarantine? Did you pick up your guitar again? Did you, you've planted a new garden? If you purchase an air fryer, share your best recipes. And the response, the feedback to that was fantastic. And to me, it spoke to this idea of lightness and joy, right? In a space where things are really heavy. Now, understanding that we are transitioning to who knows what is next, right? We have Omicron, we have Delta, and I say COVID, if anybody, if you guys are familiar with Greek life, it's like COVID is lining up all her line sisters, like, all right, Delta, Greek, who's next, right? So we don't know. I say that to say we don't know. So we have to still be very flexible in terms of our planning and what our constituents may want to see. But we did have our first in-person event relatively back in October. And I know what was comforting to folks was having access to an outside space, knowing that there was a masking protocol in place. But, folks were excited to see each other again, right? Being in person. But, we did advertise outside access is going to be available. So now we're balancing those two things, moving away, as Ashley said, prior, you just had these events because that's kind of what you always did. Our usual format has been highlighting a Rutgers alumna, that's, represented Rutgers well, right? And we'd bring her in person at an event, at a hotel. And it was really a sort of share your story and a question and answer networking post. Works wonderfully, great. But I think this time calls for a new structure. So I'm thankful for COVID and quarantine and virtual because it forces you to do things a little bit differently. So I'm certainly grateful for that.
I like that way of thinking, Asado, and thank you, Ashley and Asado, for sharing that. You both raised a lot of great points. Two that stuck with me are carefully considering two things. Carefully considering one, Ashley started with, is this event worthy, right? Let's think about our events in a precious way. Is this event worthy? And then if it is, what format is best for what we're trying to accomplish? And Asado talked about considering what role do you want to offer to the community you serve? They knew, the Women's Professional Network eBoard, they knew they wanted to not serve the role of continuing those tougher conversations. That was out there. They wanted to serve the role of connection, serve the role of offering joy. I love that. And actually, it might have been the Air Fryer Happy Hour event where we have in our, there are a few quotes, alumni quotes sprinkled throughout our RUA annual report. One of them, I believe, is from that event. And the person said, what a fantastic event. It definitely facilitated genuine connections tonight. So, kudos for focusing on the connection because I see where that led you. And actually, Ashley can attest to this. I know that their team we do, of course, lots of showcasing academic excellence on both light and tougher topics, but I believe it was the planting event that had a tremendously high number of attendees.
Yeah, it was last summer. So it was, the height of these heavy topics. So we threw in we worked with our partners in SEBS and did a how to grow your garden, knowing like Osada said, everyone was picking up these different things and everyone seemed to have a garden at the time. And it was one of our most well-attended webinars that summer.
Excellent. That's great. That's great. Something you both touched on too is as we seek to engage one of the most diverse alumni communities on the planet, talk a little bit about the importance of engaging diverse voices in the event planning, right? Diverse ideas in the event planning, rather than, deciding in a silo what should be the next program or initiative.
Asado, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. Well, if I go back to these lighter events, the feedback from them has been great, right? And so what that also highlighted to me was the importance of including your constituents in your program planning. So if I recall an event that we did have, I would say midway through the pandemic, where we had Rutgers alum we had a nutritionist, we had a food scientist, and it was really the focus of this conversation was, how to stay physically healthy during quarantine, utilizing, food, right? I mean, because some of us were eating too much or not eating at all. It's still a lot, right? Again, well attended. I'd say at one point we probably had 80 people on this webinar, which again showed me that the other things that we were doing perhaps did not call people to attend those events, right? Yeah. And especially if it was a certain type of Rutgers alum, right? So it's an attorney, it's a judge, it's an accountant. Who does that speak to? Other attorneys, other judges, other accountants, right? And so whereas where we have more universal topics that touch everybody, because everybody eats or doesn't eat, right? I say that to say food touches all of our lives in some way, shape, or form, either positive or negative. You have just so much more broad scale access to your constituents, and to utilize your words, Yvette, connection, which is critical. And so it's actually quite humbling when you think about it from the perspective of there were large groups of people that were left out of the conversation, even though they technically do fit under the umbrella of Rutgers Alumni Women's Professional Network, Northern New Jersey chapter, right? Because they were not connected to those events. So what I would love to be able to do is, what we have not been so good at doing is certainly being more analytical, strategic in drawing out what folks would like to see prior to planning events, because the feedback that I'm providing to you guys now has been from events that we've had and the feedback that we've gotten from those events, right? Yeah. And so how to shape that from our really scientific perspective, I think would be a good next step.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How to ask, how to listen, right, and how to use that data, right?
Right.
And many of you who are participating today, you may have had the experience. This is something you can work with your staff partner on. I mean, we've done brief because we want people to answer, right? Ask questions that you're going to use the data you get back. Brief surveys to constituencies that we launch, that the staff partners can help create and launch through your social channels and or through email to gain some insights that help do exactly what Asad was talking about, ensuring that your constituency influences your planning going forward. Ashley, I know you wanted to weigh in on diverse voices and ideas as part of the conversation, because that's surely a component of what your team does in a big way.
Yeah, sure. So similar to what Asada said about, bringing in more people to really highlight that diverse programming, we do similarly on the Central Advancement Events team. Again, like I said before, we really lean on our colleagues to be able to have a broader reach. I mean, we're a team of 8 planners, so if it was just up to us, we would stick in our small circle, but really leaning on our colleagues in the other departments really helps us, figure out, those diverse faculty and alumni panelists that we can feature on our events. And there's, Rutgers is vast and our alumni body is huge. And so to have those other people to help us, figure out which, who we should be highlighting, I think attributes to that overall diverse programming. We also recently launched a few event series one of them being current events and the other one with a focus on DE&I. So having those event series in our toolbox, when we go out to our partners across the university, we can highlight these event series and hopefully have programming that fits within them. And that, again, just helps us keep a focus and an eye on diversity at all times.
That's great. That's great. So I want to shift this to in-person events. While there is caution, there is a great interest among many to try to connect in person, right? That came in through the question we asked in the registration. That was definitely a theme in folks' answers. So tell us from your experiences. And Asada, you started to touch on this with your in-person event that had outdoor access and communicating as such. What do in-person events look like now, both on and off campus? Maybe share any key safety reminders or tips when planning an in-person event.
Yeah, we had a recent in-person event in October. And so there were, I think, multiple items that made it successful. So the first one was the topic, right? And again, going with the theme of having universality and connection and importance to people, to really large groups of people. So the topic was, now that we are sort of transitioning to maybe a post-COVID world, what an employer can and cannot do as it relates to COVID vaccinations, right? Can you be fired for not having a vaccine? Do you have to get vaccinated? What are exemptions, et cetera? In addition to, so we had 2 lawyers, employment lawyers on the panel. And then we had an accountant that really talked about, if you had a side hustle during COVID, what tax implications potentially there could be, in addition to what are some things you could potentially claim, expense, et cetera, from a COVID perspective. I didn't even know masks, tax deductible, didn't know that. But that's a different conversation.
Yeah, but to your point, very relevant, relevant content. Yeah.
Exactly. So say that all to say that this was information. I don't care if you're a lawyer or an accountant, anybody could use this information because it touches all of us. And then we also had the event at a really beautiful hotel in Montclair. So usually the Rutgers Alumni Women's Professional Network, we have our events in Bergen County. So this was Essex County, so a little bit different access to folks that may not go to our Bergen County ones because it's just a little bit further away. And yeah, so lovely hotel, really felt like I was actually in New York City. And then it had a terrace, right? Which made a big difference for people in terms of comfort, right? So being able to go outside. And so for the folks that did attend, there were many women that said, this is my first time out. Like, I have not been out. And so I know the first time I went to an event this summer, which it was super weird doing that first event, having that outdoor access made me that just more comfortable, right? That I could go outside, we could talk outside, we could sit outside, because it's a lot to sort of be reintroduced into a space of people that you have not been around and you're eating and drinking, especially if you have not done that, in a year or two. So that was so I see that event as a success, and it takes into consideration all of the elements that we've been picking up along this time. Connection, right? Access to a broad group of people, and also comfort, right? Is this a safe space? And so, it's to be seen what happens in the next month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I would like to try to do more in-person events. I know people are craving it because there is something different. I know I connect better in person. I'm a in-your-face person, and I'm a hand-on-the-shoulder person. And in virtual, I think we're zoomed out. We're Zoom fatigued. We're seeing all our lines and our wrinkles on a daily basis. And I know we're over it. But safety first. So because of that, I think we still need to continue to be flexible regarding our planning. And if it is a move to more virtual, depending on how things look over the next month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, it's keeping in mind the lessons learned during 2020 and 2021 about what translates better over Zoom.
Mhm. That's a great point.
And then for us on the advancement events team, going off of what Asado said, she kept mentioning comfort. We've really found that, we have to keep in mind that all alumni have a different level of comfortability when it comes to in-person events. So we are very mindful to almost over communicate with them before an event. So we always had our typical, event reminder emails that we would, schedule, letting them know about, the event location, timing, things like that. But we've really become more detailed in our communications before an event. So, right when you get to the event webpage, through the registration process, and then all the emails leading up to the event, we constantly are communicating all of the policies that we have in place so people can feel comfortable attending the event if they'd like to. So, any of the university or state policies regarding vaccines or masking, we make sure to include, but even other things I would have never thought to share before COVID, like, is it an outdoor event or does it have an outdoor component? Is it all inside? What's the ventilation systems like? What are the seating arrangements? Is everyone at my table vaccinated? Is there assigned seating? Do I know who I'm going to be next to? All things like that I would have never thought to share with attendees before an event. They're now coming up, and they're questions that we get and questions that we need to feel comfortable and ready to answer for our attendees to make sure that they feel comfortable. So we try to give them as much information as possible beforehand that will be helpful for them. And we even include, a health screening questionnaire that I'm sure everybody receives for any doctor's appointments, or I get them every Monday for my son's school. We're so used to seeing them now, but we've, included that too, to make sure that everyone is being mindful, and if they're sick or not well, we've relaxed some of our cancellation and refund policies if it's a paid event, just, with that understanding in mind that we are still in COVID times. And then finally, we always, for all of our in-person events now, we had this in the fall set up for all of our events, we have a cancellation or a pivot plan in the event that we have to either pivot to a virtual event or unfortunately cancel the event. We have a checklist and a plan in place for all of our events if it does have to come to that, because as we know, things can change at any time now, so we just have to be ready for anything.
That's great advice, Ashley. And it makes me think that both Asado and you talk about a very thoughtful approach to in-person events, and definitely more communication, because that increased communication about venue, outdoor access, venue policies on COVID, masking guidelines, all of that. It's just going to make people understand what they're walking into. And when they understand what they're walking into, they're more comfortable, more likely to attend, more likely to enjoy themselves. That makes a lot of sense. It almost makes me think from a volunteer perspective, because this isn't their paid role. You almost have to amp up the value for doing an in-person event, right? So if there's quality content, quality topic, outdoor access at a modern venue like Asada and her group's event, and then communicating more, there's more that goes into it. But when done right, it's an opportunity for meaningful connection. Also, by the way, Ashley mentioned a health screening sample communication. We have a sample of that on our tools page. So ouralumni.com/tools. I could actually put the direct link in the chat at some point when I get a chance. It's a sample of a health screening questionnaire that any of the groups can use whenever they need to. It's the same one essentially that the events team uses, and definitely increase communications. And then you also said like a pivot plan, should you need to pull that out of your back pocket at the 11th hour. Also makes a lot of sense. So that's a lot of good information about in-person. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to chat them in the box to Asado or Ashley, and we'll get to as many of them as we can today, or you can discuss them in breakouts as well. As we shift to virtual, tell me a little bit about your recommendations or top tips for virtual programming specifically, as we recognize that there's great need and value for the balance of both.
For us, I think our virtual programming has kind of done this little wave. Right in the beginning of COVID, we weren't sure. We were like, everyone was said, what is Zoom? Like at that time, no one was really even using Zoom. So we were one of the pioneers. We even had our IT team ask if we as the event team could show them how to use some features, because we were really the first ones within the RUAA to really utilize, and the foundation to utilize Zoom. So, I think now we can all put that expert check mark like on our LinkedIn pages, but we're really trying now to, again, focus and strategize and find that virtual programming sweet spot. I mean, we were doing a ton of webinars, last summer and in the beginning of COVID, because everybody was home and everybody wanted to, they didn't care if it was through a computer, they just wanted to hear from live people. So we were doing a ton right in the beginning, but now as everyone's shifting and we're doing this balance between in-person and virtual, we're really trying to, figure out what is that sweet spot in terms of how many webinars should we be doing? What's the ideal time of day or week now that some folks are back to work, some are working from home, or a mix? And then, how long should these be? So we're still experimenting with that. And I would love to hear, like maybe in the breakouts, what everyone's opinion on that is. And I can share kind of what we've been trying to figure out. But I feel like it is this balance, and you need to, keep, it changes so much. So we really have an eye on it. Each month we're looking at the data to see what works best. And then we've also tried to think outside of the Zoom box and really experiment with other options for virtual. So we have an account with, it's called StreamYard. You might have seen some of our programming on our social media accounts, but it allows us to live stream out to our different social channels. And we've been doing these quick 20 to 25 minute, very lighthearted topics or how-to videos with key, expert alumni in different fields. And they're like infomercial, like info sessions, but they're quick, they're light, but we capture such a different audience with them. So it's just something different and something you can easily, as you're scrolling social media on your phone or during your lunch break, just hop on really quick. So, also experimenting with things that are outside of that typical webinar format.
That's interesting to hear, Ashley. And I do know that the on-demand viewing for some of those sessions are pretty high in comparison to the on-demand viewing for a typical webinar, right? So if you're going to invest time to go back to listen to something that's 50 minutes, it might have to be really good. But if it's a topic that you're interested in, and it's a 20-minute interactive, content-focused program, I feel like the likelihood of going back to view that is high. That's good feedback. Asato, is there any top tips for virtual programming from your side of the house?
Yeah. So, because we were having these more intimate conversations, what I learned, it's really important to have someone managing the chat, because it wasn't until post the conversation had ended and going through the communications in the chat, seeing like, oh, this person asked this really deep, significant question that was not addressed. So it is super critical to have sort of a chat manager if you're going to be doing virtual Zoom, in order to not only continue the conversation, but just make sure things are addressed that people ask, because the last thing you want someone to walk away with is like, nobody answered my question, particularly if it's something shared that was, incredibly vulnerable. It took them a lot to even put that in the chat, because we know, we've all been on Zooms where there's someone that dominates the conversation, and other folks are perhaps more comfortable typing in a chat as opposed to speaking. So you want to ensure that you provide opportunity to individuals with those sorts of personalities, and that they feel heard as well, right? Because it can be heard in a myriad of ways. So that's been a key learning for me.
Yeah, I know Ashley's team has come to that same realization real quick. Sure, maybe we only need one person to manage that event, but depending on what we hope to really accomplish, it's easy to overlook the components of the presentation, and then the interaction of the logistics in the chat. So that's a great tip. And, you know, with the volunteers, I'm sure someone else would be thrilled to have the opportunity to do that interaction and focus on just that too.
Right.
That's a good tip. Thank you. One of the questions that jumps to mind, I know Asado, you shared that the in-person event didn't have a tremendous amount of people, but it was completely successful to all who attended and you know, put it on. It makes me think about how we determine if an event was successful, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person or hybrid, and how has the last 2 years perhaps shifted what success looks like?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So whereas perhaps prior to COVID, the benchmark for success would be the number of attendees at an event, right? Generally speaking. And we all know from running these things, you know, maybe you have 100 people sign up, you have 50 people attend. And you want people to come to these events, right? Because you're outlaying money just from an operations perspective, right? You want people to attend your events because it's also woman power on my end to put on events. But now in this space, I completely define success differently. If people attend the events and they walk away and say, and even if it's just that one person, this was exactly what I needed, thank you, event was successful, right? Because you right now, you really have no idea what it is that people are dealing with, from job losses to, you know, deaths, to just the stress of being in quarantine and not being able to do what you usually did, to, you know, there's just a vast, I say everyone has gone through trauma, whether you are going to admit it or not. We've all experienced trauma in a myriad of ways. And, you know, I don't think that there's levels to the trauma, it's just trauma. So we'll call it that. So to create a space where people feel connected with other people, we have no idea what that does to their spirit and their psyche. And so if it's that one person that attends this event, whether virtual, in person, and left feeling good, left feeling that they connected with other Rutgers people, left feeling that their tank was a little bit fuller than it was before they arrived, that's a successful event, right? Which is a completely different definition from prior, whereas I would look at the RAWPN bank account to determine success, as well as the attendee list, right? Because the people got to pay to attend. And so did we collect the cash to, like, you know, repay what's just got debited from our account, and how many people came? Regardless of how they felt afterwards. Because that didn't really come into play because it wasn't important. I already collected your money. Do you know, like, it's different. It's different.
It is.
Right?
It is.
Because you may not have enjoyed the event, but you already paid. Yeah, so it's just a very different definition. And I'm thankful for that, because this is really why we should be putting on alumni related events. It's for connection, really.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ashley, would you want to add to that?
Yes, I agree with everything Osada said. I don't think in this post-COVID world it's realistic or even fair to us as the planners are the ones putting our heart and soul into these events to rely strictly on that overall attendance goal, because like we pointed out, some people just aren't comfortable attending in person. So it may not be about the sheer number, but what that connection was with the ones that did attend, whether virtually or in person. And we still do track, we still send out a post survey, and if any of you have come to an event lately, we have a very short post event survey, and we track 3 key things: net promoter score, which really shows us, would you come back to us and would you promote this event and our events to others? What is your connection? Did you feel connected to Rutgers after attending this event? So like Osada said, that connection is, especially now, super important. And then finally, we look at, attendee demographics. So, were they first-time attendees? Were they, donors? Were they regional attendees that, again, maybe can't come to New Jersey, but now that we're having these hybrid and virtual events, they might be able to come. So are we reaching a more global audience? And then also we're starting to track, what is their involvement post-event? Are they staying connected through us either attending more events or volunteering or just getting connected to the university in a different way? Because that's really what we're here for, and to serve the university.
Thank you, Ashley. And I want to leave some time for breakout conversations. So I want to thank you, Asado and Ashley, for sharing your experiences and insights today. We're now going to transition to breakout conversations. In the registration, we asked, what event practice do you think will be most helpful or important as you plan for alumni engagement programs in the coming year? And a common theme that Deb actually just mentioned in the chat was striking that balance between virtual and in person, not surprisingly. So given that, I asked you to consider perhaps sharing with each other in your breakouts. How will you determine that balance in the year ahead? Consider what you want your group to be known for and build engagement opportunities around those goals, around what you want your legacy to be. Consider how in-person may look a bit different. Consider shorter virtual, quick topical talks like the ones Ashley was talking about with some interaction. Consider leveraging digital to engage industry experts across our vast and first-class alumni base that you're all a part of, as well as staff and faculty, which can and should all be done in partnership with your staff liaison. So I'm going to let our events team do their magic and put us into breakout rooms. And then we're going to come back for a very brief closing at the end of those conversations. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I think we have almost everybody back in the main room, and we're going to close it up for you at the end of the night right now. Well, depending on where you are, night, Eastern Standard Time night. Looks like everybody's back. So I know I had a really great conversation in my breakout room. I hope that each of you gained some valuable insight and ideas from the conversation today, both smaller group conversation and the panelists. So I want to thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our alumni volunteer leadership at the RUAA, many of whom are with us, and all participants, and of course, our amazing staff. There will be a follow-up email to get your feedback on this event, and we'll share some of the information that Linda and Alan shared today too. The recording of this event will also be posted and shared once available for on-demand viewing. I have two quick reminders for leaders of volunteer groups. One is that our grant program is open with an application due date of January 18th. So just an FYI on that, just a reminder, all groups in good standing are eligible to apply for these funds, and the information is online at ouralumni.com/RUAA grant program. Also, there will be an update that comes officially, but regarding our in-person events policy, but I will share it here first. And that notice will share that our in-person events will no longer need approval beginning January 2022. So whether they're on campus or off campus, they will no longer need Rutgers University approval to occur. Could something change? I mean, of course, but that is the plan, and we will still offer resources and reminders and best practices on in-person planning, right? Follow the most strict guidelines, be it your CDC, your county, your venue, and so on, and some of the things we talked about today, but there will not be Rutgers leadership approval required. So on behalf of the RUAA, I sincerely thank and acknowledge every one of you who offer Rutgers your time and passion by planning programs that connect alumni to each other and to Rutgers. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you both virtually and in person real soon. Have a good night.
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shane.